In this video, I want to focus on verb types. I'm on page 24 of the grammar packet, and my section here corresponds very closely with the Cohn and Gray text, so it supplements that. Some of the examples are actually from that. So Cohn and Gray separate out the different types of verbs into 4 categories, but I wanted to note that you might have noticed other places studying grammar that the be verb is usually considered a linking verb, but Cohn and Gray separate that out. And I think that makes sense because the be verb does take some extra patterns that other linking verbs don't have. So let's look at the be verb first. The be verb would be any verb that is derived from to be, so be, am, was, are, is. And part of identifying verbs is concentrating on what comes after the verb in the sentence. And if you focus on what words come after the verb, what parts of speech they are, that's going to tell you what type of verb you have. So for be verbs, you have 3 types of things that can come after it, which was what makes it so special. None of the other verb types can take either an adverb after the verb, a noun, or an adjective. The be verb can include all 3 of those things after it, not at the same time. So let's take a look. In our first example, we're looking for our verb. It's a be verb, is, and then we notice to the right of it is a prepositional phrase, in his den. The prepositional phrase is answering where, so we know it's an adverb. So in this sentence pattern, we have the be verb with a prepositional phrase adverb after it. So we see that the be verb can take an adverb after it. The other construction is when there is a be verb and afterwards it is an adjective. The be verbs always, the words to the right of be verbs always modify the subject of the sentence itself and not some other noun. So that's another clue that you can tell where it's a be verb that you have what we call a subject complement adjective. So we're going to mark those as a subject complement adjective because they're complementing the subject of the sentence. The adjective clever describes the subject of the sentence, students. Sometimes that description comes in the form of a noun phrase where it's restating who the subject is. So in this example, I am an optimist. The noun phrase an optimist is redefining the subject of the sentence I. So we call those subject complement noun phrases. Sometimes those can be pronouns too. And when it is a pronoun, because it's a be verb, we use the subjective form of the pronoun. So we're not used to speaking this way, but it is the proper way to write. Instead of saying it was him, the proper way to say it would be it was he. And you're going to see that in the pronoun exercises that are in the course packet too, in the grammar packet. So let's keep going down and look at our next category of verbs, which are linking verbs. And as I said before, a lot of grammarians include the be verb under linking verb category, but we separate it out here because those be verbs can take an adverb after it, whereas other linking verbs cannot take an adverb after it. They just take the subject complement adjective or the subject complement noun phrase after it. So let's look at some of these examples. Linking verbs are always verbs of senses, but sometimes there are other words that you wouldn't normally associate with a sense. For instance, appear, become, continue, grow. They're sort of verbs that are living, acting, moving, There's strange verbs, the linking verbs. So you just sort of have to memorize which verbs are linking verbs. Some of them are sensory, feeling, looking, smell, and sound and taste. But some of them are these sort of acts of existence. So these are the ones you sort of have to memorize to know that they're linking verbs. But also you'll have a clue because of what comes to the right of the linking verbs, which will always be a subject complement adjective or a subject complement noun phrase. So in this one, it's I feel sad, and sad is again referring back to the subject, so we know it's a subject complement adjective. Let's look at another one. She became a professor. The subject complement noun phrase restates who the subject is. So that's how we know it's a linking verb and that it's a subject complement noun phrase. So the questions to ask yourself for linking verbs are these. Do the words to the right of the verb refer back to the subject, re-describe it, or modify it? Is the verb a sense or a state of being? Those two questions are going to help you identify whether it's a linking verb or not. Now for our third type of verb is the intransitive verb, which don't need to take anything to the right of it, although they can sometimes take an adverb. So let's look at those. These are our most simple sentences where it's literally just a subject and a verb. I studied. You don't need any information after studied to understand this sentence and to make it sound complete. But you could add an adverb describing how you studied or where you studied or why you studied. So you could say, I studied all night long. I studied in the library. All those things would be adverbs, prepositional phrase adverbs, or even a one-word adverb you could use. Then finally, our fourth type of verb is the one that maybe you remember and might be our most difficult to understand, but by process of elimination, I think you can pretty much identify the transitive verb. So the transitive verb, think in terms of it's transmitting information to more stuff to the right of it. So it often has, well, it has to have a direct object to the right of it. If it doesn't have anything to the right of it, it's probably an intransitive verb. But if it does have another noun to the right of it that's unrelated to the subject of the sentence, then you know it's a transitive verb. So let's look at some of these examples. Sarah hit a ball. Since a ball it's no restatement of Sarah, it's not describing Sarah, it's its whole separate noun introduced into the sentence, we know that this is a transitive verb with a direct object. What did Sarah hit? She hit the ball. So whatever the verb is acting on is the direct object. Sometimes you're going to have a direct object and then another set of words that describes that direct object or modifies it. So let's look at that pattern. Sarah made a cake is the direct object because it's what she made, but she made the cake for me, so that's our indirect object. Sarah made a cake for me would be a direct object, object complement, but in this case we're putting that me in front of cake, and that's our indirect object. So that's two ways that that can be positioned. Let's look at the next example. Sarah made the ball red. So in this instance, the ball is our direct object, and we're describing ball, so that can be considered an object complement because it's describing the direct object. Sarah made the ball a gift. Here, the ball, which is also a gift, is a noun phrase, but it's still an object complement because it's describing the ball. So you can see what we're doing with all of our verb types is really focusing on the relationship of the words to the right of the verb and how they are related to each other. And we know in this transitive pattern that all of these words, whether they're adjectives or nouns, that come to the right of the verb have really nothing to do with the subject. They're separate nouns as opposed to our linking verbs. If we scroll back up here, which redefine the subject. The professor and she are the same people. But if we go down here to our transitive verbs, these are two different nouns, not restating Sarah, who she is, or describing Sarah, but rather telling what Sarah did to something or someone else. So your focus is to the right of each verb to figure out what each thing is. And I think probably your hardest verbs are going to be these transitive ones. So with a lot of practice, we're going to get this down. So here's just a summary of some questions you can ask yourself as you're going through trying to figure out what type of verb is in a sentence. Intransitive verbs don't need any words to the right, but they can take an adverb. So one thing you could do is take that prepositional adverbial phrase out, and if the subject and verb can stand on its own, you know it's intransitive. Linking verbs never will take an adverb to the right of them. It's always going to be a subject complement adjective or a subject complement noun. The be verb can take all three to the right of it. Those are easy to identify because there's some form of be. And then our transitive verbs can have a slew of nouns and adjectives after them, but they can be made into the passive voice, which we'll be doing next. Just another clue that Cohn talks about, that indirect objects, which would be those second set of nouns or adjectives that are modifying the direct object, indirect objects are almost always animate. They're almost always a person. They receive or perceive the direct object. So that's a good way to think about that. So when we go down to our verb type exercises, let's do some of these together. So we're going to look for the verb first, save. Then we're going to look to the right of that, lives. We can see that this is a different noun than the subject, seatbelts. So we can call that a transitive verb, and then lives would be the direct object. Let's do another one. We see this is a is verb, so that's one of our be verbs, and that means that this would be a subject complement, and since it's a noun phrase, we know it's a subject complement noun phrase. And that's how you're going to identify those. So see if you can do the rest on your own. You might want to look for the be verbs first and get those out of the way. Then go back and look for the intransitive verbs and sort of work your way through the list like that more systematically than just guessing at each sentence if you're having a hard time doing that.